The sun was beginning to set over Greenville County, casting long golden streaks across Woodruff Road. Inside her car, Katie Blauvelt snapped a quick selfie, the last photo she would ever take. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other young woman finishing a normal workday, unaware that danger was already closing in. Somewhere nearby, a man watched and waited. The same man she had once trusted, loved, and feared. By nightfall, Katie would vanish without a trace. Her car would be found abandoned. Her phone would go silent, and a quiet stretch of South Carolina would become the setting for a story so dark investigators would remember it for years to come. What happened between that final photograph and the moment police made their discovery would expose a web of obsession, betrayal, and unimaginable cruelty. Catherine was born on August 8, 1994, in the quiet town of Mountville, South Carolina. Everyone called her Katie. She was the kind of person whose laughter seemed to brighten any room. Her family, her brother Brandon and sister Brittany, adored her warmth, her kindness, and her easy ability to make others feel seen. In her early 20s, Katie had dreams of serving her country and building a meaningful future. That dream began to take shape the day she met John Blauvelt. He was a local U.S. Army recruiter known around Simpsonville for his discipline, charm, and strong sense of leadership. He was older, 26, confident, well-spoken, and the kind of man who carried himself like someone people naturally trusted. When Katie met him at a restaurant next to his recruiting office, it felt like fate. John represented everything she wanted to be a part of: purpose, stability, and pride in service. Encouraged by his guidance, she joined the Army in 2015. But her time in uniform was short. Just 2 months after enlisting, a spinal condition forced her into a medical discharge. She returned home discouraged, but John stayed by her side. Their connection deepened quickly, and within a year, they were married. Katie moved into Jay's house in Simpsonville, full of hope. She imagined cozy evenings, plans for children, and a home filled with love. But soon, the reality was far from what she expected. John's once admirable reputation began to show cracks. He started inviting high school students to their home, teenagers who saw him as the cool recruiter. What began as innocent hangouts turned into wild parties filled with marijuana, alcohol, and sometimes harder drugs. Katie, who had pictured herself building a peaceful family home, instead found herself surrounded by chaos. Among the regular guests was 17-year-old Hannah Thompson, a student at Hillrest High School, the same school where John often recruited. Investigators would later describe Hannah as being completely infatuated with John. She followed him everywhere, doted on him, and seemed willing to do whatever he wanted. But her admiration came with resentment toward Katie. Those close to the situation would later say that Hannah hated her and made no effort to hide it. By early 2016, the tension became unbearable. Katie couldn't take the partying. The drugs were the constant presence of teenagers in her home. She packed her things and left. Within weeks, Hannah moved into Jay's bedroom, as if stepping into Katie's place, without hesitation. Then everything spiraled. On February 26, 2016, Hannah's father called the police. He hadn't seen his daughter in 2 weeks and was deeply concerned about her relationship with the much older recruiter. That night, officers arrived at Jay's house and found Hannah there. John was arrested and charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. That very same day, Katie filed a domestic violence report. She told authorities that a month earlier, during a heated argument, John had pointed a gun at her head. She had escaped unharmed, but terrified. Now, her complaint added another serious charge to Jay's growing list of offenses. The consequences came quickly. The Army launched an internal review and stripped John of his recruiting duties, a punishment that hit him where it hurt most. His income was cut, his career suspended, and his reputation shattered. The man who once held power and respect was now facing criminal charges and disgrace. John was furious. According to investigators, he began telling friends that Katie had ruined his life and that he wanted revenge. Meanwhile, the house that Katie had once called home became even darker. Teenagers continued to gather there with no adults setting limits. 16-year-old Allie Somerville, a friend of Katie, would later testify that Jay's house had turned into an all-day, everyday party. Marijuana, alcohol, LSD, and cocaine circulated freely. By October, Katie and John were officially separated. She had finally taken legal steps to protect herself. A restraining order barred John from contacting her for the first time in months. Katie seemed to be reclaiming her peace. Her friends and family noticed the change. She smiled more, talked about her future, and even started to heal from the fear that had haunted her marriage. But behind the scenes, John's behavior was unraveling fast. Investigators would later uncover a series of internet searches from his phone that painted a terrifying picture of his mindset. In the weeks before Katie's death, he had been looking up things like how to sharpen a knife and what do I do when my wife dies? The searches weren't random. They were the early signs of a plan. October 23, 2016, was an ordinary Sunday for Katie. She woke up early and went to work at PetSmart on Woodruff Road in Greenville, a job she loved because she was surrounded by animals all day. Her co-workers described her as cheerful that afternoon, just like always. At around 2:15 p.m., she clocked out and left for the last time. She was supposed to meet friends later that evening, but never arrived. When calls and texts went unanswered, her family grew alarmed. Katie wasn't the type to disappear or ignore people she loved. By nightfall, her parents reported her missing. What they didn't know was that earlier that afternoon, Hannah Thompson, the same teenage girl who had once lived in Katie's house and who was now deeply entangled with John, had driven him to Woodruff Road. According to arrest warrants, she dropped him off near Katie's workplace. Hours later, at 4:17 p.m., Katie's phone registered its final activity, a simple selfie taken inside her car. She looked calm, unaware. Her arranged husband was nearby, waiting in the shadows. At 5:03 p.m., John called Hannah. 1 minute later, he sent her a Snapchat message that said, "Check out your Snapchat." Yar. The message itself was deleted from his phone, but investigators believe it showed evidence of what had just happened. Evidence too gruesome to ever recover. Not far from the city, on the outskirts of Simpsonville, an old abandoned farmhouse stood quiet and forgotten. The property had been empty for over 20 years, a place local kids used to explore out of curiosity. Katie knew it too. She had played there as a child. But on that October evening, it became the site of her final moments. Inside that farmhouse, John attacked her. Evidence later revealed that Katie fought back fiercely. DNA was found beneath her fingernails, proof of her desperate struggle to survive. But John was stronger. He overpowered her and stabbed her to death. After the murder, He dragged her body through a small basement window and shoved it into a rectangular concrete box in the center of the basement, a cold, hidden tomb. Then methodically, he cleaned up and left. To cover his tracks, John drove Katie's car to a parking lot on White Horse Road and abandoned it there. Hannah followed in another car, helping him escape the scene. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses would later capture the exact moment Katie's vehicle was left behind, silent, lifeless, and alone. For 2 days, Katie's loved ones lived in agony. Her mother, Patricia, told reporters she felt a deep dread, as if she already knew something terrible had happened. Police had launched a full search, but with every passing hour, hope faded. Then, in the early hours of October 26, 2016, came the discovery that would end the search and break everyone's hearts. Just after midnight, detectives received a call that led them to the abandoned farmhouse. A mutual friend of both Katie and John, named Wayne Rower, had gone there himself to look for her. What he found in the basement was a scene of horror beyond imagination. Wayne later recounted how he had searched the upstairs rooms first, calling out her name, then descended into the basement. There, inside the old concrete box, he found her. Within a minute, he was on the phone with police. When investigators descended into the basement of the old farmhouse, even their years of experience couldn't have prepared them for what they found. The air was heavy, still, and cold. The kind of silence that only follows something unthinkable. In the center of the basement stood a large rectangular concrete box, a crude, forgotten structure that had sat untouched for decades. Inside it, they found the body of Katie. She was just 5 feet, 1 inch tall, a teeny little thing, as her mother, Patricia, always called her. When Patricia learned what had happened to her daughter, the grief was beyond words. She was left hollow, struggling to understand how someone so kind and full of life could meet such a violent end. Katie had loved animals, laughter, and the simple joys of everyday life. And now, she was gone. Detectives then turned to the person who should have been most affected, her ex-husband, John. But from the moment they approached him, something felt wrong. His demeanor was distant and unnervingly calm. He didn't ask where Katie had been found or what had happened to her. There was no visible sign of grief or disbelief, only a detached response focused on himself. The investigators noticed the absence of any genuine emotion. It seemed as though John felt nothing at all. No sorrow, no regret, not even surprise. When investigators interviewed him again a week later, his coldness remained. He spoke of Katie with indifference, reducing her to a minor figure from his past rather than the woman he had married. It was clear to everyone in the room that something about his behavior didn't align with that of a grieving ex-husband. It aligned with that of a man hiding something much darker. When asked whether he had gone to the funeral home to see her body, he said he had, and that he brought Hannah Thompson with him. The statement stunned investigators. It wasn't just inappropriate. It showed a disturbing lack of boundaries and remorse. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. Detectives knew they needed hard evidence before they could arrest him. But before they could act, John made his next move. One that would turn the case into a years-long manhunt. He ran, taking his red car. John vanished. Alongside him was 17-year-old Hannah Thompson, the same girl who had once idolized him, the same one who had helped orchestrate the events leading to Katie's death. For law enforcement, this was deeply alarming. If John had been capable of murdering his own wife, What would stop him from harming Hannah too? By November 18th, 2016, investigators finally had enough evidence to charge him with murder and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. But by then, he was already long gone, a fugitive on the run. That same day, Hannah's parents reported her missing. The teenager, who had once been a love-struck high school girl, was now running across the country with a suspected killer. Back in Simpsonville, detectives continued to piece together the evidence John had left behind. What emerged was a clear and chilling portrait of premeditated murder, one fueled by vengeance, control, and rage. His phone records told a story of careful planning and obsession. Beyond his earlier searches for how to sharpen a knife and what do I do when my wife dies, John had also looked up, when can police tap your phone? Between October 18th and November 1st, he had repeatedly searched for his own name and Katie's in news articles, watching how the investigation unfolded. But perhaps the most damning clues came from his messages to Hannah. On the very day of the murder, he texted her two chilling words, "She's gone." Then another, "I'm going through with that thing." These weren't the words of a grieving husband. They were the words of a man confessing his crime, not to police, but to the one person who had helped him get away with it. And then there was his journal. Found among his belongings, its pages revealed the dark logic he used to justify the murder. In one entry, he wrote, "Someday, I hope you understand why I did it. The girl was evil to me." And in another, far more direct, he had simply written, "I did it." Friends and acquaintances who knew John told investigators he had grown increasingly angry and unstable in the weeks leading up to Katie's death. Some recalled him talking about how she had ruined his life. Others said he couldn't let go, obsessed with the idea of revenge. Even before the murder, there had been terrifying warnings about what John was capable of. Friends of the couple would later testify that John had openly talked about killing his wife. In one chilling conversation, he had asked one of them if she wanted to go to Charleston so he could kill his wife. He even bragged that he was born to kill people, both good and bad. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from several witnesses who testified that John had offered to share Katie's $100,000 life insurance payout with anyone who helped him carry out her murder. It was cold-blooded premeditation, the kind of detail that revealed just how far he was willing to go. After John disappeared with 17-year-old Hannah Thompson, the search quickly escalated into one of the largest manhunts in South Carolina's history. Investigators tracked the pair's movements across the country. They were last seen in Las Cruces, New Mexico, on November 15, 2016. From there, the trail went dark. As evidence later showed, John and Hannah drifted through Alabama, Texas, and California, living as a homeless couple and staying off the grid. John's military training in survival and combat tactics made him a particularly elusive fugitive. He knew how to vanish, how to cover his tracks, how to live unseen. Then on December 12, 2016, there was a breakthrough. Hannah Thompson resurfaced in Eugene, Oregon. She had finally been abandoned by John. Exhausted and terrified, she found refuge in a family friend's home and called her parents, saying she wanted to come home. She told investigators she and John had been living on the streets, constantly moving, surviving on little. But when they questioned her about Jay's whereabouts, she lied. She claimed he had disappeared one morning and that she didn't know where he was. That wasn't true, and it would take years before she finally admitted it. By 2019, the case was still unsolved, but not forgotten. It was featured on In Pursuit with John Walsh, bringing national attention to the manhunt. Walsh described John as a wolf in sheep's clothing, and tips started pouring in from across the United States. Still, no one could find him. Throughout it all, Katie's family refused to give up. Her mother became a relentless force for justice. Along with activist Tracy Font and the group Freedom Fighters upstate South Carolina, Patricia launched the Justice for Katie campaign. They kept Katie's name alive through social media, public rallies, and memorial events held each year on the anniversary of her death. Their determination inspired other families of homicide victims and built pressure on law enforcement to keep the case active. After 6 long years, the case finally gained new momentum. In early 2022, a specialized U.S. Marshals Cold and Complex Case Task Force took over the investigation. With fresh resources and advanced tracking technology, they began reviewing every lead, and one name kept reappearing: Hannah Thompson. Investigators discovered that despite her earlier lies, Hannah had remained in contact with John for years. Eventually, she agreed to cooperate and told them everything. Her information led the marshals to Medford, Oregon, where John had been living under a false identity, Ben Clean. They placed the home under surveillance. They watched as a man fitting Jay's description came and went, blending into his quiet neighborhood life. The confirmation came when they spotted one distinct feature: a pirate tattoo on his arm, identical to the one documented in his police file from 2016. That was all they needed. On July 20th, 2022, at 4 p.m., U.S. Marshals and local police surrounded the Medford residence. When they took him down, John tried one last time to lie his way out. He insisted his name was Ben, but the officers already knew the truth. He was stunned. After 6 years on the run, the fugitive who thought he was untouchable had finally been caught. Inside the home, officers found the woman John had been living with for 6 years. She was devastated. She had known him only as Ben Clean and had no idea she'd been sharing her life with an accused murderer. 3 months later, on October 12th, 2022, Hannah Thompson was arrested and charged with 5 felony counts, including obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. The girl who had once idolized John would now face justice herself and eventually testify against him. John Blauvelt's trial began on September 16, 2024, nearly 8 years after Katie's murder. The prosecution presented an overwhelming case. The most powerful moment came when Hannah took the stand. She told the jury that John had confessed everything to her: how he had killed Katie, how he had hidden the phone in water near the abandoned house, and how he had covered her blood with dirt. The defense tried to argue that police had fixated on John too early, claiming there was no definitive DNA evidence and that Hannah's story had changed over time. But the mountain of evidence, the Google searches, the journal entries, the text messages left no doubt. John had planned every step. He had threatened Katie, obsessed over her, and even tried to profit from her death. On September 20th, 2024, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all charges. Judge's sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Almost a year later, on August 21st, 2025, came the final twist. Hannah Thompson, once facing 55 years behind bars, struck a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and concealing a felony and received only 3 years probation. For Katie's family, it was a devastating blow. Patricia called it a slap on the wrist and a punch in the gut. Even after the verdict, questions of fairness lingered. Hannah had helped a murderer evade justice and yet walked free. But for Patricia and those who had fought alongside her, there was some solace in knowing that Katie's killer would never again see the outside world. The campaign for justice for Katie continues, not just for her, but for every victim whose story risks being forgotten. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you can be the first to hear about such real-life stories.